On March 4, 2026, 10 provinces and territories signed the National Energy Corridor Agreement, an attempt to wire together the separate grids of a continent. For over a century, these grids were optimized for isolation. Power flowed north to south toward American markets, leaving neighboring Canadian provinces effectively disconnected from one another. To bridge these gaps, the federal government is putting $60 billion on the table. The objective is to double Canada's grid capacity by 2050 through a series of massive east-west interties. The engineering plans are drawn, and the funding is secured. But building infrastructure across so many jurisdictions creates a human coordination problem that traditionally takes decades to solve. Every party at the table has a different priority. Alberta views the grid through the lens of resource development. Quebec views it through the lens of absolute provincial sovereignty. Our current model for coordination relies on forced alignment. We assume that for a project to move forward, every participant must adopt the same values and compromise on their core interests. When you try to force these distinct entities to think alike, the project usually stalls. You end up with years of circular negotiations and expensive lawsuits. If a central authority tries to overwrite these local voices, the result is a watered-down compromise that fails to meet the specific needs of the communities it crosses. Relying on this old system of political consensus makes a project of this scale almost impossible to execute. The Zyro Hive model suggests a different approach, called the point of origin. It's a data architecture that removes the need for political alignment entirely. In this system, you don't need to agree on a single vision. You only need to provide an uncompromised record of your local reality. A watershed speaks its own truth. It reports its flow rate, its temperature, and its nitrogen load as fixed physical data points. A utility provider contributes its load forecasts. A local community makes its specific funding gaps visible. These aren't debating points, they are attested facts. Indigenous nations record their treaty rights and traditional knowledge as sovereign data, rather than translating their history into a government spreadsheet. When individual truths are visible on a single ledger, it reveals the path of least resistance. The system doesn't need to resolve a conflict. It simply maps the coordinates where all these unyielding requirements are met at once. We layer the geometry, dropping a data layer of resilient watershed coordinates. The line routes itself strictly within these zones. It adjusts to connect communities with funding gaps, curves to avoid regions lacking specialized labor, and locks into place aligning with sovereign Indigenous data. The grid effectively plans itself. By making every priority visible simultaneously, we can build massive infrastructure through the alignment of facts rather than the negotiation of beliefs. This explains why Quebec's refusal to compromise on its provincial jurisdiction isn't a problem. Under the point of origin model, that insistence on sovereignty is a highly reliable data point. It provides a clear boundary for the system to work within. Quebec shows us that sovereignty is the foundation of coordination. It is a baseline that should be expressed through data, not surrendered in a negotiation. They prove that distinct entities can collaborate with total visibility while maintaining their independence. The $60 billion in federal funding can now be directed toward projects that meet the precise requirements of this collective map, rather than following the loudest political voice. This architecture applies to any infrastructure project where multiple nations or interests share the same space. To manage global challenges, we have to stop trying to force people into a single consensus and start making our individual, unyielding truths visible to the whole. Truth starts at point zero. When every point is visible together, the federation builds itself.